Forbes India presents M Connect, powered by Marmo Solutions.
Hello and welcome to M Connect, celebrating architectural excellence and innovation. I'm Radhika Sinha. Today's theme is Global Practice, Local Soul, and we are asking, how do architects navigate a fast, globalizing design world without losing the essence of where they come from? It's a conversation about identity, subtle storytelling, and how Indian sensibilities travel across borders and come back totally transformed. Joining me today are three extraordinary names from the architecture and design fraternity who each bring a unique voice to this journey. So let's welcome them to our studios. First we have Aparna Kaushik, founding principal architect at Aparna Kaushik Design Group. She's from Delhi, and Aparna Kaushik's design focuses on clarity and simplicity, enhancing a space natural beauty with functional and unique forms. Her Delhi studio creates luxury homes that blend modern and classical styles with careful craftsmanship and attention to detail. Next we have Zafar Chaudhary, founding partner and CEO at Habitat Architects, is from Delhi. The firm's design philosophy focuses on artistic excellence, thoughtful innovation, and purposeful storytelling, shaping spaces that reflect the essence of their occupants. And lastly, we have Vivek Gupta, principal architect at Arvind Vivek and Associates, is also from Delhi. He has over 35 years of experience in architecture and interiors, and he champions the build to suit ideology, emphasizing alignment with climate, coordinates and client needs, and has expertise in climate responsive and solar passive energy efficient architecture. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, before we dive into our theme, let me ask you this question to all of you. Aparna, starting with you. When you're designing a place, be it a city or a culture that you did not grow up in, what is the first thing that you try to understand about it?
I think the first thing that you try to understand is the people, the lifestyle of the place, how the life has originated and how it's propagating there. Simple thing as their nuances in terms of their culture, their greeting habits. It's not really one thing that you can pinpoint about a culture, but it's largely as a whole, as a race, how they have come forth in terms of, what their lifestyle is today. So I think all of these are things that you notice about a culture that is not yours and where you are not from. I think this is what I feel that I notice the first when I visit a new place.
Well, that's interesting. And what about you, Zafar?
Very much similar. The whole idea is to understand where the people come from, what their history is, what their climate is, what is important to them. And so the history, the culture, the climate, these three aspects are very important to the creation of architecture. So that is what we try to understand before we actually pick up the pen, and this dialogue with them is very important. Dialogue with the inhabitants who are going to be inhabiting that place is going to be very important. How we live as Indians is going to be very different how, people in France live, or people in Saudi Arabia live, or people in Latin America live. And I'm talking about, let's say, a domestic space, a residential space. So it's to understand them at a very close level is going to be very important if you are going to design something which is going to be tailor-made for their lifestyle.
Yeah. Okay. And you, Vivek?
Very simple. Architecture is a social art. So you need to understand people, the context that you're creating in. So I'm talking about general architecture, not keeping it to residential only. So it's not generally always about, but it's always going to be about people, not necessarily the inhabitants, as in the residential inhabitants, but people who are going to work, or people are going to go to a mall, or people are going to go to a museum or something like that. So the context is extremely important. Like Zafar said, climate of course plays the largest part in any creative space that architects design, because you need to rhyme with the climate, the context, and obviously the client. And the client changes at different places because the demography changes, people change. And architecture, as I said, being a social art, you need to be looking at the social demography.
Well, that's a great insight. And, coming to the bigger question, how to stay rooted when your work goes global. So, Aparna, you have a very distinct work style. It feels very Indian, but at the same time, it connects with a lot of people everywhere. So, in today's global design world, how do you keep that Indian essence alive without it being looking like a cliche?
Well, I think most importantly for me, I don't really look at my design process as something that, okay, I want to use this and therefore I will design. I think it's a sum total of what exercise that I have been given from my client to where they are. Like, for example, when you do a project in Dubai, is very different from how you would approach a project in a place like Alibag, which is a beach property. So I think largely it's to do with what kind of, the site conditions that you're given with, what kind of client brief that you have, what are their aspirations, and of course, as an architect, what my influences have been in the past. I don't think I'm someone who would get carried away, okay, I want to use a dome, so I'll use a dome. I think it's the site that prompts sometimes, it's the aspiration and the manner and the imagination of the client. And of course, my exposure, my traveling, my background, and my likes and dislikes. So I think what we generally end up designing is really a sum total of all of that. And when you do that, I feel that, sometimes your design is not really, today especially, because when you look at your monuments and stuff like that in European countries or in India, they were very, very rooted in local materials. But today we live in a global world where we are exporting, importing so many materials every now and then. So I think today mostly designs have become more global, because also of the availability of materials and availability and also the technology. Like, for example, sometimes I do feel when I look at these big glass buildings in Dubai, how much is going to be the energy load on the building. But I'm sure that, there is a lot of research that is going into now reducing energy even while using glass. I think practices are by and large are very global now. It's not really that if you're in Delhi, that you can't design anywhere else, or it has to be a certain type of design.
I think it's quite tricky, right, to maintain that balance between your local needs and also achieving that global look. Now, coming to you, Zafar, when you're working on an international brief, how do you negotiate between hyper functionality and emotional context when a client are always wanting a more global look?
All right, so there are two parts to it. One is the hyper functionality. So it's not hyper functionality, it's just functionality. Every building is supposed to serve a certain purpose, right? So that is a functional need of it. So you can put the classrooms in a straight line, you can stack the classrooms above in a straight line, and you can stack the classroom above in a straight line. That will fulfill the functional aspect of it. But we as architects have to go beyond the functional aspect in any part of the world. So it's how do you create poetry out of that? One is you create the spatial experience and the poetry by using the fundamentals of architecture, whether it is proportion, balance, scale. These are uniform and they will be used all over the world. And at the same time, you need to blend in the culture, the climate, the history, and the materials for where you are designing this building for. So the climate in Brazil, as I said earlier, is going to be very different than the climate in France. So your design needs to respond to that, and you have to create poetry out of that. And when you talk about the global look, so our understanding of a global look is clarity, refinement. So the idea is to create something with clarity and refinement, using the fundamentals of design and the principles of the local culture, the material, and the climate. So that is how we respond. And that's how you create a unique piece of spatial experience or architecture.
So you have to do a lot of customization is what you mean, as per different places.
As us understanding, and of course, customization and the bespoke solutions are a part of it.
So Vivek, you have worked in a lot of different countries. What is the idea of scale, the way we occupy and experience spaces? How does that differ from West to here?
So I think it's a misnomer. Scale is universal always. I mean, it doesn't change, because human scale is the same and you're designing for human. As long as you're designing for human, it's the context, as I said. There's a difference between, and that's what I've been emphasizing, that architecture is a social art. Art is very, very universal, but architecture is very contextual. It is to respond to the context you are creating in. So the scale varies from the built use that you are defining. If you're designing for a residential apartment, the scale is completely different for a residential apartment. It will correspond to the ergonomics of a human being, the door heights, your ceiling heights, your openings, widths, and the openings that are there in the building. All of that corresponds to the need of the humans. When you design an institutional building where you have to cater to the neurodiversity of people, because there are various people who are going to be occupying, there the architect's role becomes very, very important. But the scale still remains the same. It's the change that comes about is, as I said, about the climate, which is very, very essential. When we design projects in the Middle East, the scale is different because there is a certain kind of material that is required. The materiality available is different. The climate is completely different. So obviously you are designing for that climate. I remember doing a school in Dubai where what happened was that the need was completely different. They had different sections for women and boys and girls, but the labs were to be common. So we had to devise a system, design it in a manner that when the boys were there in the lab, there was another entrance for the girls to come in, and when the boys leave, the girls come in. So it is not exactly the scale, but it is also the built need of that building or the usage that was there. When we design malls, which are supposed to overwhelm you, the scale again is different. But the scale in terms of the West to the Indian culture is because we are more, how do I say, more emotional people. We like to relate to things that are from our past. We relate to symbologies. We relate to some kind of past memories and everything. So we create with that kind of a scale here. When we talk about designing a building which is going to be of opulence, we think of domes, we think of large open spaces, we think of large courtyards and all of that. So that context is there. So we carry the baggage of the Indianness and the kind of heritage and the emotional connect that we've had with the buildings of the past and the social context also. Whereas the context in the West is a little different. People are more individualistic, so you design for them with individuals in mind, not so much of a society and all of that.
Yeah, we'll discuss more on that in detail. Now coming to you, Aparna, is there a single global design idea or a philosophy that made you rethink how you approach your designs here in India? And also, how do you blend those international influences in your work here so that the Indianness, the Indian character doesn't loses?
I think when you are designing a project in India, especially for an Indian family, I think we are very rooted in a way of life. No matter what influence we have in terms of architecture in whichever country, you try to do that within your own context. I think you end up anyways being Indian because our lifestyle is so much rooted in outdoor spaces, how we love the weather. We want to be outdoors all the time. We don't want to be in all air conditioned spaces every time. We have 10 months of very good weather almost throughout the year. So I think there isn't really an effort to make things Indian. But yes, when you get influenced, let's say for example something abroad, let's say a European classical architecture or a French chateau, like a lot of my clients, when they travel, and people are traveling a lot these days, as they would collect their influences, they would bring it back home, and they would share it with you that, look, can we do something like this? Having said that, the brief is very clear. You don't want to recreate a certain architecture, but you want to reinterpret it in a way that also suits the modern Indian context. I think that is the soul of the exercise always. I love classical architecture and I love the contemporary, styles mixing contemporary styles with the classical architecture. I think somewhere down the line, it's always a delicate balance between the influences of the West and the needs and the functionality and the climate of where we are building the property. I think that is always the governing factor. But one thing that has always sort of fascinated me, like you said, what has really influenced me, during my travels, and something that I would take away is the restraint. Somewhat I feel that in India we always tend to do a lot, and this is something that I've learned to, a European restraint in terms of over detailing, in terms of over adding, over use of materials. I think this is something that I have really come to appreciate and I try that, I should also have that balance in my projects.
Well, that's a great example of how you balance your work. Now, Vivek, you already spoke about how Indians are more emotional, and in India, actually, we build spaces to last for generations. But in the West, if you see, people like to change and rebuild things. So, how do you think when you design for them, for Western clients, does that change the way you work or you approach a project?
Certainly, we are people with, we stick to our past. We believe in heirloom, we believe in heritage, all of that. It's not to say that the West doesn't believe in all that, but there is a very distinct way of handling things. The permanence versus impermanence of living style, lifestyle and everything allows you to have those buildings into adaptive reuse. Whereas in India, whatever we build, supposing we're building homes, we cannot think of building a home getting converted into an office or an office getting converted into a mall or something like that. But we in the West, we have some great examples. Think of London. Along the Thames, what used to be all the wharfs are those silos or the godowns along the Thames, because that was the river route and all the material transportation used to happen through the river. Now those buildings are fine, they're standing because there's a life cycle of a project, supposing that was 200 years or something, and those buildings are 100 years. It doesn't mean that they demolish them. They value their heritage as well. I think London is one of the finest example of conservation and along with building new. So what they have done is that they have put those buildings to adaptive reuse. So you find offices in those wharfs now, you will find housing, you will find shopping, you will find open spaces, you will find museums, all that have become adaptive reuse of the same wharfs into different usage. Think of, in London, there's another great example, and I think in India or any other place it could have been blasphemous. There is a church in Mayfair, which is called the Mercato Mayfair. The church has got converted into restaurants. Just imagine next to the altar, there is a beer cafe now. So that's fantastic. So that's again adaptive reuse. What I also feel is another great example of how permanent structures with impermanence or a new interjection that has come about is at the Louvre in Paris. It's a building which is I think amazing building. Aparna will tell you more about the style and the whatever age that is in. Imagine that IMP has put a glass pyramid, which is a completely dichotomic structure that has come about, and I don't think anywhere else, because the permanence that we attach to India, we would have allowed something like that.
And we would have always matched
that.
कि ये इसके साथ जाना चाहिए.
That's one of the finest examples. So it also comes from an attitude that there is adaptive reuse being done. There is a need of the hour that neither are we demolishing that building nor we are making a new building. But we are, because of the usage, because of the change of habits and everything, that there is more traffic, you need to have people coming because of the condition, weather condition, you create a pyramid, everybody enters into that, and it stands as a testimony of very, very beautiful intervention of traditional and modern architecture. I wish in India, in Delhi, another example is that we have so many monuments which are just lying vacant. They are in fact out of bound because of Archaeological Survey of India. I wish, and I always say that, I wish there was a Starbucks in one of those little monuments which are dotting Green Park or Horse Cars or all of these areas. We will consider that to be blasphemous because we will not be allowed to do that. But we would be able to put that into adaptive reuse. It will really thrive. Imagine in Green Park, one of those areas, or Horse Cars, one of those tombs which is there, you have a cafe coffee day or you have a Starbucks or something like that. It will really thrive. So that's the difference, that we have in our approach. I wish those kind of global practices, which are good practices, which allow you to juxtapose modern architecture or postmodern architecture to come into built environment, it will be great. What also happens in the West is that because they are transitional, we get to see new styles, Renaissance, modern, postmodern, contemporary. In India, we are going ahead with the same style, There is the same style. Nothing changes in India in terms of style. We only copy West, and sometimes it's not a good copy.
Well, that was a wonderful idea that you gave. I hope you put that to use someday maybe. And Zafar, coming to you now, when you're working with international clients, is there something in particular that you consciously highlight about India in your designs and you choose to leave out? So one thing you consciously decide to highlight and another you leave out.
Right. The traditional hallmark of us as Indians has been the adaptability. We adapt. It's a very unique feature. People come to India, they adapt. We go out, we adapt. But when we go out, we adapt surely, but we don't fundamentally change as people. So when I go out and when I'm working with the international clients, I fundamentally cannot change. My approach, my thinking cannot change. So what do I take from here? It's not that we want to create the exact Indian architecture there. We don't want to create the Indian domes and Indian jalis there. So the ethos that resonate very deep, that fundamentals that I resonate with is the aspect of discovery. So it's comes from the spiritual context as well as our architecture. So when you enter a Jagannath Puri temple or when you enter any of our traditional buildings, you don't discover the Garbhagriha right. You just don't walk into it. There are layers and layers and layers before you actually come to the center. It's like, you have to, multiple layers have to be weaned off before you actually come to the soul. So idea is not to open the gate of the church and you go, so, oh, there it is, all the grandeur of God right there. The idea is to discover yourself and discover the spaces as you go along and finally come to God. So the aspect of this discovery, an aspect of the spatial experiences from the entrance to the destination needs to be a set of experiences which actually culminates there. So that is the aspect of Indian architecture or Indian ethos which I try to carry when I do international projects.
Okay, now we have to take one quick responses from each of you. Very short answers. So do you think what is the future of architecture in India? Is it about reworking on old tradition or creating something absolutely new? Let's start with you, Aparna.
I think it will be a mix of both, always. I think the architecture that you will see in the future will be a mix of technology, a mix of your past influences, a mix of what your functionality and the need at the hour is. I think it's going to be a sum total of it.
Well, that'll be very interesting to see. What about you, Zafar?
Well, I think it's going to be a dialogue. It's going to be a dialogue between the past and the future. We as people, we as Indians, love our traditions, we love our culture, we love our festivities, but we aspire to be a developed world at the same time. So, we are doing a very interesting project in Lucknow. We're actually, the entire retail area is actually like a courtyard. And there's a huge banyan tree which sits in the middle of the courtyard, like gives a shade to the whole courtyard. And the entire facade is like from the Avdi Arch, a reinterpretation of Avdi Arch into the modern architecture. So that you have the emotional connect as well, but it's aspirational as well.
That's great. That's very interesting. And what about you, Vivek?
I think we need to ram the rot that is there already set in, because unless we suburbanize the country, we will have problems, because we will allow organic growth the way it is. It'll be always haphazard. We will never be able to build smart cities. We'll never be able to make functional cities. Organic India is, and organic, if it remains, then we are into chaos. What we need to do is strengthen our suburban areas. We need to have very robust urban planning bodies. We need to have robust architecture which defines the usage. We also need to look at policies which are inclusive of all socio-economic structure. As I said, architecture is about people. Unless we strengthen people, unless we designed for people, we will be just creating chaos.
Well, that was a great answer and the perfect way to end this conversation today. Well, that's all for today's inspiring conversation on M Connect, where architectural excellence meets cultural identity. A big thank you to Zafar, Vivek and Aparna for sharing their unique journeys of blending global innovation with local soul. As we have seen, great design is not just about structures, it's about stories, roots, and the future we build together. So I'm Radhika Sinha and I look forward to connecting again on the next episode of M Connect. Until then, keep imagining spaces that speak to the heart and the world.
Forbes India presents M Connect, powered by Marmo Solutions.